Welcome. You're not just here to learn English. You're here to step into someone else's life, to feel their emotions, to understand their choices, and to connect to their humanity through every word. Through this journey, English becomes more than a subject. It becomes a bridge between past and present, between language and heart. Today's story is about a girl who never had the chance to grow old, a girl who hid in silence, but whose words echoed through history. She was not famous when she was alive. She was not powerful. She was simply honest, and that honesty changed the world. This is the story of Anne Frank. Anne Frank was born on June 12, 1929, in Frankfurt, Germany. She came into the world just as it was beginning to fall apart. But for the first few years of her life, Anne's world was full of warmth. She was the second daughter of Otto and Edith Frank, a German Jewish family with deep roots in European history. Her sister Margot, 3 years older, was quiet, polite, and calm, and was the opposite, full of questions, energy, and laughter. Even as a small child, and had a presence. She was known for her wit and her love of talking, always curious, always in motion. She was the kind of girl who wanted to know how things worked, what people were feeling, and why the world was the way it was. Her father, Otto, was gentle and thoughtful, a businessman and a dreamer. He believed in books, education, and kindness. He read to his daughters, told them stories, and always answered their endless questions with patience. Her mother, Edith, was more traditional, proud of her faith, careful with rules, and sometimes overwhelmed by an spirited personality, and respected her mother. But their relationship was complicated, something that would later show up in her writing. From the outside, their life was comfortable. The Franks lived in a large apartment in a nice neighborhood, and Margot went to good schools. They had cousins, aunts, and grandparents nearby. The family celebrated Jewish holidays, attended services, and valued their identity deeply. But they were also part of the wider German society. They saw themselves as modern, open-minded citizens. But history had other plans. When Anne was just 4 years old, in 1933, something terrible began to grow louder in Germany. The voice of Adolf Hitler. He blamed the Jews for Germany's problems. He preached hate, and soon he rose to power. Laws began to change. Jewish families like the Franks lost rights. Books were banned. Shops were boycotted. People disappeared, and was too young to understand what was happening. But her parents knew. They saw what many others refused to see, that Germany was becoming dangerous. And so, in the summer of 1933, Otto Frank made a difficult decision. They would leave their home. They packed their belongings, said goodbye to friends and relatives, and moved to Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. It wasn't easy. Starting over never is. Otto went ahead to find work. He started a small business in food products. And Margot and Edith joined him later. They moved into a modest apartment and tried to build a new life. And started school in Dutch, a language she didn't speak. But she learned quickly. She made new friends, discovered a love for reading, and began to grow into herself. For a few years, things felt safe again. In Amsterdam, on a Blund, she attended the Montessori school, where creativity and expression were encouraged. She wrote essays, performed in plays, and often took center stage in classroom debates, and loved attention. She was charming, smart, and full of opinions. She talked fast, thought faster, and often made her classmates laugh with her bold honesty. Her teachers saw her potential, but also her restlessness. She didn't always follow the rules. She spoke out of turn, challenged ideas, and sometimes argued with adults. But beneath that strong voice was a sensitive heart. She loved animals, admired movie stars, and filled her room with pictures of Hollywood actresses. She dreamed of becoming a writer, or maybe an actress, someone who could share herself with the world. At home, life had its own rhythm. Margot was studious and quiet, often seen with her head in a book, and was louder, quicker to speak her mind. She often clashed with her mother, Edith, who preferred tradition and modesty, and wanted freedom to think, to question, to feel fully alive. These tensions would later become part of the emotional core of her diary. Still, the Frank family loved one another deeply. They celebrated birthdays, went on walks, and lived with the quiet hope that peace would return to Europe. But by 1940, everything changed again. In May 1940, when Anne was just 11 years old, the German army invaded the Netherlands. The Dutch surrendered after only 5 days. Amsterdam, the city that had once promised safety, was no longer free. At first, the changes came slowly. Signs in shops, new rules in schools. Then came the orders. Jewish children could no longer attend regular schools. Jewish people could no longer ride bicycles, go to parks, or own radios. Their businesses were taken. Their voices were silenced. And then Margot had to leave their schools and start at a Jewish-only school. Their friends disappeared one by one, moved away, sent away, or simply gone. The streets were filled with fear. Jewish people had to wear a yellow star sewn onto their clothing, a mark of separation, of shame, and hated it. She felt as if the world had placed a wall around her life. And still, she tried to live. She read. She laughed with Margot. She talked with her father. But the worry in her parents' eyes never faded. They had lived through war once. They knew what could come next. And then in 1942 it did. On June 12th, 1942, and turned 13. For her birthday, she received a small red and white checkered diary. She had picked it out herself from a bookstore. It wasn't large. It didn't look powerful, but it would become one of the most important books in the world, and began writing in it almost immediately. She wrote about school, about her friendships, about the changing world. She gave her diary a name, Kitty, and treated it like a trusted friend. In her entries, Anne's voice was clear, full of life. She didn't just describe events. She explored feelings. She questioned her own thoughts. She reflected on the world with surprising maturity. But only a few weeks after that birthday, Anne's childhood would end forever. On July 5th, 1942, her sister Margot received a call-up letter, a notice from the Nazis to report to a labor camp. The Franks knew what that meant. It was not work. It was deportation, and it was death. Otto and Edith had prepared for this moment. For months, they had been planning a place to hide. The very next morning, on July 6th, 1942, the Frank family disappeared. They left their home with bags, extra clothes worn in layers, and as few belongings as possible, and brought her diary. Their hiding place was a set of hidden rooms behind a bookshelf, part of Otto's former office building. It would come to be known as the secret annex. It wasn't a large space. 2 small floors, a narrow stairway, windows that couldn't be opened. No sunlight, no fresh air, only whispers, shadows, and fear. and Margot, Otto, and Edith shared the space with another Jewish family, the Van Dons, and later a dentist named Mr. Dussel. 8 people in total. During the day, they had to remain completely silent. Workers below might hear footsteps. No toilet flushing. No water running. No voices. They ate little, moved carefully, and lived every hour with the knowledge that one knock on the door could end everything. But in that darkness, and kept writing inside the diary, and created a world where she could still be herself. She wrote about the people in the annex, their habits, their arguments, their kindness. She described her changing body, her growing feelings, her confusion about life. She wrote about her mother and the emotional distance she felt. About Margot, the sister she both loved and envied. About her father, the only person she fully trusted. She questioned everything. What kind of person am I becoming? Why do people hate each other? Will I ever be free again? Anne's words were brave, not because they were loud, but because they were true. She was just a teenager, but in that silence, she discovered her voice. She said, I want to go on living even after my death. And through those pages, she is. The secret annex became the entire world for Anne. Days and nights blurred into one long silence. The city outside went on living, bicycles rolling past, birds chirping, footsteps echoing in the alley, but Anne could only watch from behind curtains. Each day was carefully scheduled. From 6:30 in the morning until 8:30 at night, they had to be silent. During the day, workers moved through the building below. One dropped tool, one laugh, one slip of footstep could mean death. They whispered. They tiptoed. They held in coughs. They learned to disappear without leaving. Meals were simple and shared quietly. There were nights with no heat. Food was sometimes moldy. Tensions rose. In such a small space, small things became big. A spilled bowl of soup, a loud sneeze, a disagreement over bread, and clashed often with the adults, especially her mother. She felt misunderstood, criticized, trapped in both space and expectations. She longed to be seen as more than a child. She wanted her thoughts, her feelings, her voice to matter. In her diary, she wrote everything. Her frustration, her sadness, but also her dreams, her humor, her heart. It was not just a diary. It was a place to breathe. As months passed and began to change, she was no longer the playful schoolgirl who had entered the annex. She was growing in body, in mind, in soul. She wrote about the changes happening inside her, about feeling awkward, confused, curious, about feeling distant from her mother, yet drawn closer to her father, and then about something new. Peter Van Don, the quiet boy who had once seemed shy and ordinary, suddenly became her friend, and then more. They shared stories, worries, long looks, soft touches. It was her first romance, not dramatic or passionate, but tender. In that tiny attic, their closeness was a light. She kissed him. She held his hand. She shared her thoughts in a way she had never done before. And then she began to doubt. Was she really in love? Or is it just loneliness? Was Peter truly kind? Or is he just close? Anne's diary became her mirror. She questioned herself, challenged herself, and searched for truth. More than anything, she wanted to become someone of value, someone who lived with depth, who helped others, who left a mark. She wrote, "How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world, even in hiding, even in fear, and chose hope. The Franks and the others in hiding were not alone. They survived because of a few brave people who risked everything to protect them. Miep Gies, a former employee of Otto Frank, was one of them. Every day, she brought food, supplies, news, and warmth. She never once told a soul where they were. There was also BEP, another kind soul, who helped bring books, stories, and schoolwork for the girls. And Victor Kugler and Johannes Kleiman, who helped keep Otto's business running as a cover. These people, these quiet heroes, chose love over fear. They didn't carry weapons. They didn't wear uniforms. They fought hate with courage and wrote about them often. She admired their strength. She never forgot their kindness, because without them, the annex would have been a prison. With them, it became a shelter. By 1944, and had been in hiding for nearly 2 years. She had written hundreds of pages in her diary. But then, something unexpected happened. In March of that year, a Dutch government official, broadcasting from exile in London, called on citizens to preserve their wartime writings, diaries, letters, memories, and heard the announcement on the hidden radio. And something changed in her. She began to edit her diary. She rewrote passages. She gave it structure. She removed things she didn't want remembered and strengthened the voice she wanted to leave behind. She wanted it to be published one day. She imagined it on shelves, read by strangers. She imagined people understanding what life had been like in hiding from her eyes, her heart, her truth. She didn't want pity. She wanted honesty. She wanted to show the world that even behind locked doors, a young girl could still grow. On August 4th, 1944, just weeks after and finished revising her diary, the hiding came to an end. That morning, a car pulled up outside the building. Armed German officers stormed the annex. They had been betrayed by someone who had told the Nazis of their hiding place. To this day, no one knows exactly who. They were arrested, all 8 people in the annex, along with 2 of their helpers, and left behind everything: her room, her clothes, her words. But her diary was not lost. Miep Gies, in her quiet heartbreak, returned to the annex after the arrest. She found the pages scattered on the floor. She picked them up, tied them with a ribbon, and kept them safe. She did not read them. She could not bear to. She hoped one day and would return. The Franks were first sent to Westerbork, a transit camp in the Netherlands. There they were stripped of their belongings, their names, their dignity, and became just a number. From there, they were transported to Auschwitz, the most feared of all Nazi camps. The train ride took days. The cattle cars were packed. No food, no water, no space. When they arrived, they were divided. Men to the left, women to the right, and never saw her father again. In Auschwitz, survival meant constant fear. Forced labor, shaved heads, cold, disease, hunger, but stayed close to Margot. Even in that horror, she looked after her sister. They whispered at night. They remembered the annex. They remembered Kitty. In late 1944, and Margot were sent to Bergen-Belsen, another concentration camp. Conditions were worse. There was almost no food. Typhus, a deadly disease, spread quickly. In early 1945, Margot became too weak. She fell from her bunk and died. Days later, and followed. She was 15 years old. Just weeks later, The camp was liberated by Allied forces. But for Anne, it was too late. Otto Frank survived. When the war ended, he returned to Amsterdam. He had lost everything: his wife, his daughters, his friends. And then Miep Gies handed him the pages of Anne's diary. He sat alone and read her words, her fears, her love, her strength. He cried. He read again. And then he made a promise. The world will know her. In 1947, the diary of a young girl was published. At first, it was small, but word spread. People across countries, cultures, and generations were moved. Anne's voice, silenced too soon, was now speaking louder than ever. And Frank never walked free again. She never finished school. She never kissed her true love. She never saw her name in print. But in hiding, she found a voice. And in her voice, she gave generations the courage to speak. She reminds us that even in the worst of times, we can choose to be honest. We can choose kindness. We can choose to believe in goodness. She once wrote, "In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." If a child in the darkest corner of history could still believe in light, then maybe so can we.